The revolution is lit.
Uhuru comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday study featuring Chairman Omali Yeshitela. My name is Yeshitela, the Director of Agitation and Propaganda for the African People's Socialist Party, as well as your MC for this morning. Today is highly important, and we encourage you right now to invite your friends and family to this study. This week, Chairman Omali Yeshitela continues reading from the political report to the African People's Socialist Party's 2021 plenary titled African Workers of the World, Unite and Organize. He continues in chapter 2, starting at subhead, Once the Center of Imperialism, the US is now exposed as the paper tiger. For the first hour, the chairman will review the study materials, and in the second, we will open it up to you, our live viewers, for your questions. It's my honor now to introduce our leadership, the leader of the African nation and the worldwide African revolution, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru, Chairman.
Uhuru, thank you very much, Comrade Assistant Director Akile. First of all, what I would like to do is to call on everybody to join with me in wishing a revolutionary happy birthday to my Chief of Staff, Comrade Ekenge Mayele. She survived another year, which is something that's always worth celebrating as an African in the world, any place. But beyond that, she didn't just survive; she's led a worthy life, and up to now, fighting for the liberation of our people, for the total and absolute liberation and unity of Africa and African people globally. So, revolutionary happy birthday, Comrade Ekenge. I want to also indicate that another very important milestone in history, and that's that of today. And of course, it was on February 21st, 1965, where the United States government murdered Malcolm X. Of course, as typically the case, with the assistance of Africans. I wanted to say that in 1981, on the at the first Congress of our parties, of the African People's Socialist Party, which was convened some 9 years after our founding, we passed a resolution. And I wanted to remind those of us who are in the party and part of the Uhuru movement and others who may not be aware of it, but should be aware of it, that a resolution was passed at that first Congress held in Oakland, California, that saluted Comrade Malcolm X and all the other Africans who've died in pursuit of the liberation of our people, and some who've just fallen victim of terror that comes with the being a colonized population. So at our first Congress, we passed a resolution declaring February 21st to be African Martyrs Day, and to be celebrated by African people globally, no matter where you are, whatever village, township, country, state, province that we are located in. We should hold up the day, February 21st, as the Day of the African Martyr. And we obviously chose February 21st because of the significance of Malcolm X in terms of really contributing to the ideological and political direction of our movement subsequent to the Garvey era anyway. And also, we wanted to take this weapon, from our colonizers and from the thugs and imperialists who dominate the lives of Africans and oppressed peoples around the world. Because the things that they have mostly that they use against us is prison and death. And they didn't have to kill, for example, Malcolm X the way they killed him. They didn't have to kill King the way they killed him, or Lumumba, or any of the others. They could have made it look like they slipped in the bathtub or and hurt themselves or got murdered in a car wreck that they did. That was a common practice in South Africa, by the way, at a certain time. But they wanted to kill these Africans in exemplary ways because they wanted to use their deaths as means of terrorizing and pushing African people out of the struggle for liberation. And in fact, to some extent, they succeeded because there was a serious period leading up until the 1980s where we were continuously running into Africans who had been so demoralized by the assault on our revolution, by murders everywhere, that included the Fred Hampton and included so many other people that a certain demoralization has set into our communities, and people would say every time we have a leader, the white man kills them. And so some people were afraid to struggle and engage. And even today, we find people who won't attend certain meetings in certain places, Africans, because of fear what the government has done. So we take this terror and this fear from them. And we raise high the memory of those Africans who have fought and who stood up and went against the colonial terrorist state apparatus that sits on top of us, and sometimes even the ordinary white people that act as extensions of the state and murder us. And so we say that as opposed to what your desired, what your intent is to show that to become a revolutionary, to stand up for the people is futile, that we will kill you, etc. We take this Martyrs Day and we show that that there's nothing that's, as Ho Chi Minh once said, more precious than freedom and independence, and that we will fight and we will win our freedom, and that instead of these martyrs being indicators of the futility of struggle, they show us the heroic need for Africans every place to struggle, and they show us the vicious nature of a social system that's based on colonial domination of people. So February 21st is something that the resolution that we passed in 1981 called on African people everywhere to celebrate, and whatever martyrs in your communities or martyrs, and of course they don't have to be just martyrs common to your community, but they can be, because there's so many martyrs of African people. They've killed so many of us in the struggle for freedom. So you can use martyrs in your community and all the martyrs that we know who stood and fought for the liberation of our people. And I want to say that February 21st, this is February 21st, this is African Martyrs Day, as far as the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement are concerned. So I want to thank you, Comrade Akile, for the incredible work, hard work that you do all the time. And I want to thank you, Comrade Ikenge, Mayele, and call on everybody to join me in saluting your birthday on today. And I'm hoping that every place we're located, African people will be engaged in in having celebrations of African Martyrs Day. I know at least one is scheduled for later on today that I will be participating in. So I want to go now, brothers and sisters and comrades, to the political report. And the fact that I can go back and talk about a political report, talk about a Congress that was held 40 years ago in Oakland, California, that put forth a resolution around African Martyrs Day, helps us also to recognize the significance of having a revolutionary party, the African People's Socialist Party, that represents the only meaningful continuum of revolutionary struggle from that period from the period of the 1960s, which was a crucial moment in history, time where the entire world was ablaze with the struggle of oppressed peoples around the world that ultimately was crushed by the imperialists, certainly the African Revolution that promised so much for the future of oppressed people everywhere. And so it was in that Congress that we passed this resolution. And now we are talking about the political report that comes from the second plenary of the party's 7th Congress that we are reading from today. We have never stopped fighting. We are that organization that's been here, and many people know we are here, and we have resolved most of the critical questions, ideological, theoretical, political questions that stood, that went unresolved at the point of the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s, except for the continuous struggle and work of the African People's Socialist Party that has been here and been struggling and offered every African who genuinely interested in making the struggle for liberation an opportunity to join this forward motion of history that's represented by the African People's Socialist Party. We're still here. And we're going to be here until we crush this monster that oppresses all of us. And so it's not necessary for people to go out and imitate us and to try to take and revise what it is that we have put forth. We are here, we've been here. And so we're going to go now, we're on page 17 to the political report. And the subhead or subtitle that we are working with on this page is "Once the Center of Imperialism, the US is now exposed as a paper tiger." Today, the US colossus that has openly dominated the world as the preeminent imperialist power for more than 70 years since the end of the Second Imperialist World War is being exposed as a paper tiger Chinese revolutionaries once derided when China was a leading force in the struggle against colonial capitalist world hegemony. During these 7 decades, the US has functioned as a center of gravity for the imperialist system. It has been a defining political and economic power. Almost every capitalist country and its colonized dependent pay tribute and, to the extent possible, model their economic and political systems on those of the US. This, along with the evolving economic structures, is what is now referred to as globalization. What is increasingly clear today is that the contradictions reflecting the deep crisis of this global social system of parasitism are concentrated in the US and represent an unraveling of colonial white power that is growing in visibility with each passing day. US power has been the glue that has held the global capitalist system together for almost a century. And with its decline in power and influence, the fissures of the entire global system are representative of the uneasy equilibrium we have defined before. The contest between the past and the future is heating up, and the African People's Socialist Party is leading the masses of the African nation and working class in pursuit of the future of socialist African liberation and unification. This is the future of the victorious proletariat of the world and our glorious march to the classless society known as communism. The generation-long US bloody and hopeless colonial occupation and war against the people of Afghanistan, the reemergence of Russia as a major force in international politics, the emergence of China as the preeminent global power likely eclipsing the US and the white colonial world, contribute to profound demoralization of a sizable sector of the US and European populations. Combined with the open defiance by much of the world to the continued parasitic relationship the US and Europe have imposed on them, it was almost unbearable to white US colonizers that lowly Iranians, Syrians, Iraqis, Palestinians, along with Venezuelans and peoples throughout the Americas and Africa would openly flout US white power with impunity. Here's how the notorious Francis Fukuyama describes the crisis in a December 15, 2020 submission to the Wall Street Journal. The American, and I'm quoting now Fukuyama, the American failure to observe the rules and norms of its own democracy has constituted a big blow to democracy worldwide. Russia, which actually does stage rigged elections, has been chortling over Trump's accusations against the American system, while the authoritarian rulers around the world have imitated Mr. Trump in dismissing critical media as purveyors of fake news. The COVID epidemic, by accelerating the pre-existing shift in the global economy's center of gravity away from North America and Europe toward Asia, has diminished America's relative weight in geopolitics. And that's the end of that quote by Fukuyama. It should not be necessary to remind our comrades that this is the same Fukuyama who declared the end of history after the Soviet Union collapsed, since in his mind, the US liberal bourgeois system represented the apex of human possibilities. Obviously, he has had to eat his words since that time, and even much of the revealing above quoted Wall Street Journal article includes his undiminished, obscenely obsolete worldview. The uneasy equilibrium is tipping on the side of the oppressed. Indeed, the second plenary of the 7th Congress of our party is convening at a time of extreme, intensive crisis for the colonial capitalist system that has grown to ensnare all the world since Portugal initiated the transatlantic trade of our people. This was the genesis of the crisis within the crisis-ridden capitalist system. I wanted to make a comment here too, because you know, we're reading this and we're using words like capitalist and socialist and communism, and these are words that are familiar to a lot of people. And because of they're familiar, I say a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people. And because there are a lot of people who use the same terms and the same words that we're using here in this study, some people will be confused and think that in every instance we're talking about the same thing, but we're not. And because part of what we are talking about is we are African internationalists, and our understanding of the world flows from an investigation and analysis of human society that has its, beginning with the advent of the rise of capitalism as a global system. And capitalism is that system that afflicts the planet Earth, with peoples all around the world not necessarily being aware of what it is that they're connected to, but are part of a whole global social system that came into existence. And this is the most important thing with the colonial slave trade. And that's why we talk about Portugal. We say when we're talking about, we said again, indeed the second plenary of the 7th Congress of our party is convening at a time of extreme intensive crisis for the colonial capitalist system that has grown to ensnare all the world since Portugal initiated the transatlantic trade of our people. This was the genesis of the crisis within the crisis-ridden capitalist system. So we're saying that this system was born with crisis in it, because it was born not in this innocent and relatively innocuous manner that most of the Marxists and so-called social scientists have talked about in the past, how some kinds of development inside the Europe has led to ongoing growth and what have you, that overshadowed much of the rest of the world and produced this capitalist system. Capitalism didn't happen that way. Capitalism happened as a consequence of Europe attacking Africa. It attacked Africa, and this is where this thing that Karl Marx referred to as the primitive accumulation of capital, because you gotta say, where in the hell was the starting money? Where did it start? How did it begin? Did some mysterious force just drop all of these resources in the lap of Europe that allowed it to grow to the extent it has? And of course, the question is now, it didn't happen that way. Marx talked about a primitive accumulation, accumulation that did not come as a consequence of capitalist production, but was a starting point. And this starting point he defined as turning Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of black skins. He said that this primitive accumulation that he was talking about, and he was right, he said plays the same role in political economy as original sin in theology. So this was the starting point. All the contradictions that people are looking at, and all these white boys and others running around fighting against imperialism, et cetera, but unwilling to fight against the capitalism that has its origin in the attack on Africa, African people, and then stemming from that, the colonial domination of everybody in the world. So white people are still the center of the universe. If you don't believe it, ask them. And so this is what we are defying. We are defying that assumption. And this is what African internationalism does. That's why this sentence that I just read is of such significance, but you'll find it throughout our explanation of reality. So we say capitalism, they say capitalism, we say parasitic capitalism. Parasitic capitalism presupposes that capitalism was born as a parasite, that it did not have some genius, some energy that sprang naturally and normally through resolving contradictions inside the European society. It didn't happen that way. What happened was Europe set out, a starving, impoverished Europe set out and rescued itself from disease and poverty with the attack on Africa and other peoples around the world. And this system that we now know as capitalism came from that. So I just wanted to make that point. And then the following excerpt from the political report to the 2020 plenary still correctly describes the worsened crisis of imperialism that continues to contextualize our revolutionary work. It represents an example of the urgency associated with our plenary theme and the class-based confusion of Fukuyama and other thinking representatives of colonial capitalism. And you hear this term, we say colonial capitalism because that's where capitalism came from. And that's the basis of it. That's the thing, that it didn't just come from that, but it rests upon that foundation today. And then you hear people using terms like racial capitalism and things to that effect, which is a way to avoid the fact that we're talking about colonialism. And this racism, this racial stuff, is an invention of colonialism. It's an invention of the colonial power that wants to describe our reality that in a way that still keeps Europe and white people in the center. So the problem is not that we have this colonial domination by white people against the rest of us, but the fact that white people don't like us. So there's this racism, which is simply the ideological foundation of colonial capitalism, which is the ideas in the brains of white people that makes them servants of imperialism, independently of some need for people to tell them every day, go out and kill black people or hate black. In fact, they like black people. They like black dancers. They like black basketball players in many instances, etc. I think you could find a t-shirt of Michael Jordan at a Ku Klux Klan rally. But the thing is, what they don't like is to look at the fact that everything they have come as a consequence of what they have done and continue to do with Africa and the oppressed peoples around the world. This is how we talk about crisis built into the social system. So it's not a matter of some overproduction. It's a matter of the fact that the peoples of the world, in order to live, have to fight against this system. So we now looking at this quote here from the political report. We're still on the political report to the 2020 plenary. We shall see. The following excerpt from the political report to the 2020 plenary still correctly describes the worsened crisis of imperialism that continues to contextualize our revolutionary work. It represents an example of the urgency associated with our plenary theme and the class-based confusion of Fukuyama and other thinking representatives of colonial capitalism. And here's the excerpt from that 2020 plenary. Imperialism is experiencing obvious disarray, and we're quoting, the international bourgeoisie is split in 1,000 different ways. Raging wars and threats of war continue unabated. Traditional bourgeois alliances are under severe stress due to growing competition between parasitic international thieves for shrinking access to the colonial resources. They are fighting over resources violently extracted at the expense of our lives and freedoms and totally necessary for the continued success of the global capitalist system. We're saying that it is not we who are dependent, it's they who are dependent. The economic configuration of the world is undergoing transformation at this very moment. Trade wars between China and the US, the Brexit crisis that has paralyzed England politically and disrupted strategic assumptions of capitalist development in Europe and the world. The growing split between the wealthy North and poorer South threatening the future of Spain. The disruptive emergence of an energized, if economically challenged, Russia contesting US hegemony in the Middle East and upsetting the balance of forces in Europe and elsewhere. The audacious China that sometimes aligned with Russia is increasingly willing to openly contend with the US. These are just a few of the examples of an imperialism experiencing existential crisis. There are others: Korea, Iran, Iraq, Yemen, Afghanistan, most of the Americas. Uninformed and poorly led battles are raging across the African continent. This is complicated by the contest for economic and political advantage between China, the US, and former European colonizers. This is a contest that does not have the advantage of a fully developed, coherent African internationalist, informed and organized effort by Africans to conquer power in our own name and in our own interests. The US is the headquarters of a dying imperialism as we have known it for the past 70 years at least. It is the center of the storm, wreaking havoc with imperialist unity internationally, in part because of domestic imperialist disunity. A naked battle is going on between the Trump regime and other sectors of the bourgeoisie, sometimes within his own regime. Trump's election failed to resolve the generally nonviolent battle for control of the state, which bourgeois elections are designed to do. This is the context we have characterized as an uneasy equilibrium. The task of our party is to tip the scales of history to the advantage of the oppressed, to the advantage of the future. Our job is to negate the system of colonial capitalism by replacing it with a system of socialism, resting on a foundation of a totally liberated and united African continent. Our Africa must be led by the forcibly dispersed African nation under the leadership of the advanced detachment of the African working class, whose very existence has been in preparation for this task. Comrades, this is the context within which we must examine both our readiness and unity to achieve the aims demanded of us at this moment, unquote. This is the context of our African internationalist analysis of the deepening crisis of imperialism unfolding before our eyes, minute by minute. And also, comrades, this is a statement of the significance of the African People's Socialist Party, your party, and what it is that you have to do in the world. We're not writing this. This is something that came out of our plenary. That stems from our Congress, that is to say of the party and the Uhuru movement. And the objective, of course, is to arm you to be able to do work, to extend this understanding for all of the work that you do to be informed by this understanding, which is simply something that again stems from our 7th Congress, which stems from an African internationalist philosophy. And this is to take us to work. It's not just some kind of discussion that we're having for the benefit of hearing ourselves talk, or to engage solely on social media. The objective here is to arm the working class, as certainly as expressed through its advanced attachment, our party, full cadre. This is what becoming cadre has to mean, that we take this what we are talking about, this analysis, we take it and to help people understand how to be able to identify contradictions in our societies, in our country, in our reality as African people, and to engage our oppressor correctly, to win our liberation as a whole people, to take back our Africa, and to take back our freedom wherever we are located as African people in the world, that contributes to the success of Africa and the African nation under the leadership of the African working class. This is what we're talking about. And it's a statement about your significance as members of the party, of the Hutu movement. It's a statement of to those who are not in the party and part of the Hutu movement of why you ought to be, and how we understand the reality that we're experiencing at this moment. Like everything that we do in the African People's Socialist Party in terms of talking about this reality, we try to even show you the methods that we use to come to our conclusions so that you can check them too. And giving you an opportunity to be able to have confidence in the conclusions that our party is coming from, giving everybody the ability to do that. So the majority of white people, of the white vote for Trump, was a vote against African people, even before his, and this is part of what we mean in terms of how this thing that they refer to as racism is simply an ideological expression. It's the ideological foundation of colonial capitalism. And so that we're not saying that the white people got together and had a meeting, all of them, all the time, to say act a certain way against Africans, act a certain way against Mexicans and other peoples of the world. It's not necessary for that to happen. The fact is that we're talking about a system that was born parasitic, and that this system works precisely because it has stolen and continues to steal resources. African people in the ghettos, as they like to refer to, in South St. Petersburg and North St. Louis, still fuel the development of white people, the white society, because they are settlers. They are settler colonizers, and we are the colonized. We are domestically colonized here inside the United States, and then we are colonized in other places around the world, which is Africa is continuously being bled, as are people in Mexico, as are the people of Venezuela, people throughout the Middle East and around the world. There's nothing that was so remarkable about white people. They're so smart and they're so hardworking, etc. I don't know if white people know what work would look like. They certainly couldn't. When they say work and we say work, we definitely mean different things. Because what Africans have done and continue to do, what the labor of the Mexican people has been and continues to be. First of all, we built remarkable societies of our own before the invasions that we experienced by Europe, by what has come to be known as Europe and Europeans, and which was the means by which they initiated the accumulation of resources that upon which they built societies that relied upon the resources that they were stealing from the beginning. Like it started from stealing Africans and stealing Africans' land. It started from stealing what this land is that we call the America and the Americas today. And this is where the whole thing gets started. It starts from stealing parts of Asia and the rest of the world. It didn't just start there and stop there. In order to continue to exist, it feeds itself like some vampiric entity from continuously stealing the blood, the resources, the lives, the future, the dignity of peoples all around the world, including African people, and I won't stand for it. So even before his election as US president, this is page 20, the bottom of page 20, even before his election as US president in 2016, Donald Trump had already begun to sully the pristine reputation of the US presidential electoral process. He won the affection of millions of US settler colonialist voters during campaign debates by exposing his opponents as paid puppets of the rich, confessing that he had paid some himself. However, what Trump's election did not accomplish was the capture of control of the colonialist state, the bureaucracy and arms of coercion, such as the military, intelligence, police, prison, and so-called criminal justice system. This meant that the electoral process failed to resolve this critical issue necessary for stable rule. The dominant sector of the colonial capitalist ruling class, having ruled the world for the last 70 years, immediately initiated war against Trump's administration in almost every way. And it took a lot, and almost all the liberals and many of the Negroes with them, because they hated Trump, that is to say our people did, and the press hated Trump because of his blatant articulations of imperialist policy that the liberals have learned to clothe, to dress up. It's like putting lipstick on a pig, but the pig is still a pig, even if it's a cute lipstick wearing pig, it's still a pig. And so the liberals, imperialism, colonialism with lipstick on, and Trump has taken up all the makeup. He's taken all the makeup off, and imperialism nakedly before us. And the difference between Trump and Biden, for example, is not that one is an imperialist and the other is not an imperialist. The difference is that one is an imperialist that requires the support of those that are oppressed. One is a colonizer that requires the support of the colonized to maintain a relevant authority and relevance in the struggle against the other colonizers. Both of them are contending in a nonviolent struggle for control of the colonial apparatus. And so the Trump forces and Trump and people who are associated with him have determined, have declared that the way to do this is to negate even more the significance of the humanity and the resources of the peoples of the world, to shut it down, not to even give any pretext to the relevance and significance of Black people, Mexicans, and all the other oppressed peoples around the world. This is a contest between them. It has nothing to do with us, except one wants to use us in one way and the other wants to use us in another way, in the struggle for power by each of them. Not for, it doesn't confer any power on us, except one gives the appearance of conferring power on you, because they would bring somebody who looks like you into their embrace and to put them out in front of you to represent imperialism in blackface or in some other face. So the legitimacy of his election, that is to say Trump's, was challenged with the incessant claim that Russian intervention stole the election from Hillary Clinton, Clinton, who is a proven terrorist and efficient representative of traditional bourgeois rule. Members of his administration, Trump's, were quote unquote exposed, sometimes jailed, and otherwise discredited. In other words, Trump suffered the same process of defamation and discrediting that he is claimed to have used in disputing Biden's 2020 election. So we have Biden in 2020 and Trump saying it's a fake, it was stolen, it's not legitimate, etc. And even at this moment, the majority of Republicans and white people believe Trump and support Trump, whether they believe him or not. And so the objective of Biden, of the Democratic people who are associated with that sector of the bourgeoisie, when Trump ran, was to say that he's not legitimate, because he didn't really win the election. The Russians won it for him, and therefore to destabilize and make his rule less effective, that is to say, so that he could not destroy the direction that his sector of the bourgeoisie had been accustomed to driving this imperialist train for so long. And now what has happened is that another the sector of the bourgeoisie associated with Trump doing the same thing to Biden and his election by saying that it's not legitimate, by saying that it was stolen, that's fake, it's et cetera, et cetera. Trump's not doing anything different from what Biden and his group do. And you know it, Africans, you know it, people who are from the party and from the Uhuru movement, that there's no difference between them. The only thing that you have are these liberals, African and otherwise, who need to who are afraid to strike out on our own, to take our freedom, our resources, our Africa, our dignity, our humanity, our sovereignty as a people, afraid to do that. And so they want to hold on to the skirt of one sector of the white ruling class as opposed to the other sector. And we never get freedom like that. Only thing we get is whatever musk that comes from under the skirt of the white ruling class. So during the 2020 election campaign and after his defeat at the poll, Trump began to declare that the election was fraudulent, rigged, and this was unprecedented. The president of the United States avowing that the presidential election was phony. For a while after his election defeat, Trump promoted the rumor that he might not voluntarily leave the White House upon legal completion of his term. The president of the United States was saying that the US electoral process, the primary feature of US democracy that is historically held over the heads of colonized countries the world over, is a sham. This was a major indictment of US representative legitimacy, especially coming from the US president. And then you got these liberals who are upset because Trump has defamed the elections and he's discredited all of the thugs who are murderous, assassins from the CIA and the FBI. They killed Malcolm, they killed Lumumba, they killed King, etc. And they're upset because Trump has said that that he doesn't trust them as well. And again, it is our responsibility, and the African People's Socialist Party assumed this responsibility almost 50 years ago with our founding, to take on the struggle to liberate our people and not to be dependent on one sector of the colonizer versus another sector of the colonizer. And so the turnout of the 2020 presidential election was the highest in over 100 years. Crisis of the social system. Push people out because this is the only way they saw to resolve the contradiction that was available to them. More than 65% of registered voters in the United States participated in the highly polarized presidential election. Donald Trump received the second highest vote of any presidential candidate in US history. And that was second only to Biden, who was credited with 80 million or more votes and got the highest number of votes in US history. The fact that Trump received an estimated 57% of the white colonizer vote, and it may have been more, similar to his 2016 tally, speaks volumes about how the crisis of imperialism is articulating itself domestically within the US. Contributing to the crisis is the fact that many Africans experience the white colonizer vote for Trump as a vote against Africans. At least half the people in the US, mostly white, mostly colonizers, are now convinced that the election was stolen from Trump and from them. Their passionate conviction was on display for days during and after the election in protest demonstrations in a number of states. Post-election pro-Trump protests resulted in at least one person being shot and several others stabbed even before January 6th. Even so, this is not as bad as was predicted by political prognosticators and some intelligence agencies. All hell broke out in the US Capitol on January 6th, the day the US Congress was to certify the election of Biden. Thousands of white people responded to Trump's call to come to Washington, D.C. and to lead the people in the fight for the future of the US against Biden's congressional certification, and fight they did, successfully breaching the security pretensions and actually taking the Capitol. Pictures of mobs desecrating the presumptuous bastion of US authority and democracy resemble those seen in the aftermath of US initiated coups against other countries. You've seen these photos. They show you these pictures that the United States has now initiated a coup. They say the people came out in a demonstration and they've had these people who the US does in these other countries who are agents of US imperialism and working for the US, and they've trained them. And they sometimes instigate demonstrations and things like that, showing opposition to the government that the US hates and the US wants to remove or something. And so we've shown us these pictures on TV. They've shown them these pictures with the fake news of these oppressed people who have attacked the palace and attacked the institutions of the rulers of that moment. So here's what we see, and peoples of the world got an opportunity to see in the United States. On page 22, again, pictures of mobs desecrating the presumptuous bastion of US authority and democracy resemble those seen in the aftermath of US-initiated coups against other countries. Demonstrably, the democratic masses were involved in overturning furniture, decor, and reigning despotism, perched feet up at the desk of illegitimate thugs in power. This is what they usually show us, and this is what people are seeing on TV in the United States. People all around the world are looking at this. How this happened is one of the issues that must be resolved by the ruling class in a manner that masks the depths of the crisis. They don't want the depth of the crisis to be exposed, so they have to be able to resolve how the hell this happened. And the ruling class is trying to convince the world that the crisis is contained, while still struggling to contain the wrath of the US white settler population. So they got these two things that's ahead of them. They got to show the world that this crisis is over, it's contained on one hand, while you got the majority of the white people who are still pissed off, who are still upset, who are still angry, who are still opposed to how things happen. So they got to show the world that this crisis is contained, but they, at the same time, they got to try to do something to deal with all of these white people who, the settlers, the other settler colonizers who feel like they have been displaced and not represented by the settler colonial regime. So Trump's claim of a soft coup against his regime and the general belief within the ruling Republican Party and the white colonial population that it is true, and the surfacing of armed, organized white nationalist colonialists who genuinely believe that Trump's electoral defeat marks the end of Western or white civilization, promise a rocky road ahead for President Biden and for US political stability altogether. And this is something that you shouldn't be afraid of, Africans. Certainly members of our party and who are moving are not afraid of that. The instability of colonial power, the shaky foundation of colonial power, colonialism oppressing us, and we see the colonizer in trouble. We see the colonizer government in trouble, and it frightens you. No, that's not what should be the case. Africans, you should be flocking to the African People's Socialist Party, to the Uhuru movement. We should be arming ourselves ideologically and politically and otherwise to strike out effectively on our own. We should be working with the more than 50 institutions that the African People's Socialist Party has created, preparing to govern, preparing to be a self-governing people. We should be joining us, reconnecting with African people throughout the world and the oppressed and colonized people throughout the world to overturn this horrible parasitic relationship that Europe and white power and imperialism that stems from colonialism needs in order to exist. You shouldn't be afraid. You should celebrate the fact that this crisis is here. You should celebrate the fact because you've got the African People's Socialist Party building a revolutionary process that all Africans and oppressed peoples of the world can unite with, and everybody who believes in freedom, whether you are Africans or whether you are colonized or colonized, everybody who believes in freedom can unite and support this process to overturn this rot, this parasitism that dominates the world. So the unprecedented declaration by the heads of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is the heads of all the US military forces, that the military stands with the election of Biden and is intolerant of riots, was obviously necessary to calm the fears of US government leaders, especially those of the Congress whose fearfulness was palpable in every breathless interview given following the attack on the Capitol. But it was also necessary to assure the peoples and governments of the world that the US government was secure, while at the same time publicly reinforcing the justification of neutralizing Trump as the leader of the attack on the Capitol. So this is something, I mean, you got the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff having to declare loyalty publicly, especially to the United States government and to everybody else. That was unprecedented. Nothing like this has ever happened before. Certainly not since the founding of this institution that's called the United States government on indigenous people's land and graves. So on January 17th, 1 week after the attack on the Capitol, the US House of Representatives initiated impeachment proceedings against Trump. The first time in US history that a US president has been impeached twice. Trump's troop deployment was also beefed up at the state capitol with up to 25,000 troops at Biden's January 20 inauguration. And I've seen that it's something like more than 30,000 troops. And then the significance of this deployment is helped by recognizing that this number is up to 5 times greater than the number of US troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. War on the home front, crisis on steroids. Even after the traditional method of determining the victor of US presidential elections, which declared Joe Biden Trump's opponent from the ruling Democratic Party, the US president-elect, Trump and many others refused to accept the decision. Scores of lawsuits were filed by Trump to have results thrown out that did not favor his re-election. Officials from Trump's Republican Party who had the temerity to defend the legitimacy of the system faced the public wrath of Trump, and at least one was fired from Trump's administration. Up to this day, Trump has refused to abide by the long-standing tradition of losing candidacy concessions as one of the means to support stability and confidence in the notion of US peaceful transfer of power from one capitalist representative to another. Whatever. What we must keep in mind is the truth that the attack by US colonizers on the colonial government is an attack on a government that is always attacking the domestically colonized African population. Colonialism, by its definition, is violent. And it does not matter whether the colonizer is liberal or conservative, right-wing or otherwise, it is colonialism. The domination of our people for economic gain and political advantage by a foreign and alien power. It's colonialism, not fascism. Our party's response to the perennial clamor about the need to turn the struggle of African people into one against fascism was addressed in Vanguard, the political report to the 7th Congress in 2018. Here's some of what we had to say then that continues to hold true. Quote, white fears fascism while ignoring everyday terror of colonialism. There are some liberals who would have us engage in an unrelenting fight against fascism that they see as the utterings and that they see in the utterings and actions of Trump. However, we never forget that we are colonized and that democratic colonialism is still colonialism. The fascism feared by whites and liberals look very much like the colonialism Africans have experienced in this country for centuries. Europeans are accustomed to the experience of bourgeois democracy, which hides the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. For colonized people, the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie is raw and obvious all the time through the violence of the state and the general white population, as well as the arbitrary denial of civil and democratic rights of the colonized. This is why, you know, this bourgeois democracy, this domination is always open and raw and obvious to us. There's no hidden dictatorship. It's clear all the time that we experience it. That's why, you know, the prisons are filled with African people without regard for any kind of democracy. We don't have the benefit of any kind of democracy. The dictatorship is prevalent. We see it all the time. The cop who comes up and say, give us the corner, to young people on the streets in this country. And then when I say this country, I'm speaking specifically of the United States right now. The cop who does that doesn't give a damn about any kind of constitutional right that's given to citizens for freedom of assembly, doesn't care about freedom of speech. They're talking about Trump now is defended and was defended during this whole issue of impeachment, but free speech. He had the right to say what he wanted to say. He wasn't identified as some kind of a white extremist, a white identity extremist. We get identified as white identity extremists because the dictatorship is raw, it's open, it's naked. There is no hidden dictatorship. That's why you hear white people who constantly saying, well, you must have done something wrong or you wouldn't be in jail, because they don't have the same experience with the bourgeois dictatorship that we have with them. So it's not a hidden dictatorship, it's an open dictatorship. And when we say dictatorship, we're not talking about one person rule as they like to pass off, but dictatorship is simply rule without regard for law. Doesn't matter what the damn law is. That rule without regard for law is dictatorship. It's hidden dictatorship for white people because generally speaking, even if they make a law, if they apply it one way to Africans and one way to the indigenous peoples, including Mexicans, and then it does to white people. And white people accept that. That's why the United States can go around and capture people, and they can put people in prison in Guantanamo. They can lock up people in the United States as they did after 9/11, and then put them in secret prisons. They can deny them any kind of lawyer to see the evidence because they are the others. They are the colonized. They are the enemies of white power, etc. So for the rest of the world, this thing that they talk about hidden dictatorship, this notion that comes a lot from Marxists and other people about a hidden dictatorship is only hidden to the colonizers. It's not hidden to those of us who are colonized. So again, Europeans are accustomed to the experience of bourgeois democracy, which hides the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. For colonized people, the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie is raw and obvious all the time. Through the violence of the state and the general white population, as well as the arbitrary denial of the civil and democratic rights of the colonized. What Europeans call fascism is the point where the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie experienced all the time by Africans and other colonized people challenges the veneer of bourgeois democracy enjoyed by white people. The liberals would have us turn our backs on the liberation of our people and the colonized peoples of the world to come to rescue of liberal democratic colonialism. The struggle against fascism serves a sector of the white ruling class and colonial society, but for African people, it only maintains our self-defeating fight to make white people like us and to stop the police from killing and imprisoning us. The struggle against fascism is, in many ways, similar to the fight against racism, in that it is a struggle to find a safe place within colonialism. It is a struggle that protects the colonial capitalist relationship that we have with imperialist white power. It is a struggle that unites us with one sector of colonial power against another. And it does absolutely nothing to destroy colonialism. This is reminiscent of how deceased activist and poet Amiri Baraka, when he expressed concern in 2000, this is reminiscent of now deceased activist and poet Amiri Baraka, when he expressed concern in 2008 that African and or left refusal to support Obama's election would open the door to fascism in a way similar to the rise of Hitler in Germany during the 1930s. Because you know Hitler is the fascist extraordinaire example that they like to use. First of all, many Africans have recognized over the years that what happened to European Jews at the hands of Nazi Germany follows on the heels of an accepted normalized practice of genocide against Africans, indigenous, Arab, and Asian people for hundreds of years by Europeans in the process of imposing slavery and colonialism on the majority of humanity, the process of building parasitic capitalism. The tendency to compare our situation with fascism in Nazi Germany and elsewhere is erroneous and outrageous when considering the murder, terror, torture, and exploitation that Africans have endured at the hands of our white democratic colonizers for the past 600 years. It is worth noting that with all the terror and brutality Africans have faced since our introduction to European democracy, it took the emergence of Mussolini and Hitler and the attack on the rights of white people for a special designation called fascism to suddenly become necessary. When proto-fascist repression did appear in the US in the 1950s, in what is called the McCarthy era, with a reign of terror backed by popular support from the general white population, chasing the Communist Party underground and almost into extinction, it was the colonized African population whose struggles for democracy kept the society open. Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, Rosa Parks, and an army of Africans living near starvation and suffering every imaginable deprivation were the forces that not only defeated US fascism, but forged new definitions of democracy onto the agenda of the US. Africans would still be on plantations buck dancing for a slimy, non-fascist, democratic, white nationalist social system, and every white person who so demanded had those aforementioned Africans tremble from the fear of fascism. The designer character of the term is even more obvious when we search for a definition of fascism. While there are many, including some identified as scientific or Marxist, it is clear that there is not a satisfactory a priori definition. Fascism has become a pejorative, something that defines some traits of the phenomenon once it appears, but fascism isn't capable of being defined scientifically in a way that would help us to know it before it arrives. It is notable that the ubiquitous murder, imprisonment, and police containment of the African population is never defined as fascist. These conditions are seen by the white population, including the leftists, as normal. It is only when the features of the normal existence of the colonized begin to intrude into the existence of whites or the so-called larger society, the term fascism comes into play. At that point, the colonized are called on to choose between fascist colonialism and non-fascist democratic colonialism. Amilcar Cabral, a leader of the revolutionary movement to defeat Portuguese colonialism in Guinea-Bissau, West Africa, stated in response to the Portuguese left position that defeat of fascism inside Portugal, something the Portuguese left saw as primary to their interests, would come with the defeat of colonialism, led by African liberation movements in Portuguese colonies. That, quote, this is Cabral, we must reaffirm clearly that while being opposed to all fascism, our people are not fighting against Portuguese fascism. We are fighting against Portuguese colonialism. The destruction of fascism in Portugal must be the work of the Portuguese people themselves. This destruction of Portuguese colonialism will be the work of our people. While the fall of fascism in Portugal might not lead to the end of Portuguese colonialism, and this hypothesis has been put forward by some Portuguese opposition leaders, we are certain that the elimination of Portuguese colonialism will bring about the destruction of Portuguese fascism. Through our liberation struggle, we are making an effective contribution toward the defeat of Portuguese fascism and giving the Portuguese people the best possible proof of our solidarity. This factor is a cause of pride to our people who hope for the same solidarity from the Portuguese people. Like Africans in what was then Portuguese Africa, Africans in the US and around the world are fighting against colonialism. This is something that Baraka and the anti-fascist alarmists have not understood. The concern expressed about fascism is one that would keep the struggle for our liberation locked into a fight against fascism by supporting one or another of the non-fascist ruling class parties or personalities. The fight against fascism is a fight to maintain the capitalist imperialist status quo, unquote. Ultimately, fascism is a form of the capitalist state in the same way democracy is a form of the state. Both forms of the capitalist state, like capitalism itself, requires colonialism for their survival and well-being. So let me see, comrade. I think we'll go ahead and stop now and and allow you to give us directions whether or not we should open it up for a further discussion. Uhuru Comrade Akile.
Chairman. Well, it might be possible, we do have one question, but I'm just like looking at a good place to stop. There's another subhead coming up on the bottom of page 28, if you want to just continue that point.
Right on. So ultimately, fascism is a form of the capitalist state, as we said before, in the same way that democracy is a form of the state. Both forms of the capitalist state, like capitalism itself, requires colonialism for their survival and well-being. When we say this, there are those who accuse the party of being insensitive to the threat fascism presents to democracy. Such is not the case at all. We do recognize that when the colonial capitalist system is under severe stress, it is capable of making major assaults on the democratic rights of its citizens. However, colonialism is a major assault on the democratic right of the colonized all the time, not just during times of stress. Nevertheless, the assault on the democratic rights of our people, of the colonized, is never characterized as fascism. In fact, our relationship to the system is an assault on any thing like the democratic rights. This understanding is related to our recognition that when Marx talks about primitive accumulation, it's related to this. He does so only as it relates to the development of Europe. Primitive accumulation is the means by which Marx objectified the rest of us and kept the activity of looting, rape, and pillage of colonialism as representative of development of human society. When we talk about what happened to African people, we are talking about something quite different. The start up of capitalism and European development is more than what Marx called primitive accumulation. Colonialism became the mode of production that gave birth to capitalism and sustains it today. When you look at the origin of the system, its essential nature is not phenomenally different from when it expresses itself in the form called fascism. When you look at the origin of the system, its essential nature is not phenomenally different from when it expresses itself in the form called fascism. When fascism arises, white people are experiencing features of what capitalism is and was when it was forged through the colonial project. Democracy is the ability of the capitalist class to obscure and cloak from white people's sight the anti-democratic violence that gave rise to its prominence. Bourgeois democracy is colonial democracy by another name. The real problem with fascism for many white people is when features of colonialism represent a perceived threat to sectors of the colonizer population. The definitive reference to this threat is the Jewish experience in Europe, and especially in Germany. It is only an aberration for the colonizers when they experience a glimpse of the system as it is experienced by the colonized majority population of the world. It is this lack of clarity that allows many, especially Marxists, to describe the ruthless exploitation of African and other colonized people as super profits, when in reality, these are not super profits, but they are the normal profits of capitalism not experienced by the colonizer, who indeed have a super relationship, if you will, to capitalist exploitation. It's not super, that's the way it works. It doesn't work that way for white people because they are part of a minority population of colonial settlers who benefit from the colonial system. When white people fight against fascism, they are fighting for continued colonial domination and competition between sectors of the colonizers for control of our stolen resources. You can see this flaw in the concept of primitive accumulation. The question of fascism is not about Africans and the colonized, it's about Europe and Europeans. The colonial violence experienced by African people has never been a factor in the worldview of the colonizer. Where we are now is a new place historically, unleashing the colonial peoples of the world and overturning the whole damn colonial narrative. So, is this where we want to stop now, Director Akile?
Uhuru, yes, Chairman. I think this is a good place. All right, Uhuru, and I really just want to appreciate this study. It has, again, just been really profound being able to go over the political report And, this particular section that really goes in depth into, this explanation of what fascism is and, talking about, just the whole crisis of imperialism and how the different aspects of it are manifesting and being able to provide this analysis. It's just been really profound. I just want to thank you, Chairman, so much for this political report and for this study. We do have questions and comments that I want to read, but I do want to recognize where people are watching from, including Delaware County, Pennsylvania, St. Petersburg, Florida, Lakeland, Florida, Brooklyn, New York, Battle Creek, Michigan, San Diego, California, Somerville, Massachusetts, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, St. Louis, Missouri, Tucson, Arizona, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Richmond, Virginia, Newark, New Jersey, Detroit, Michigan, Occupied Azania, South Africa, Huntsville, Alabama, Gainesville, Florida, Kuwait, Chicago, Illinois, Surrey, United Kingdom, Walkerville, Maryland, Pinellas Park, Florida, Fresno, California, Hempstead, New York, Oakland, California, Rockford, Illinois, South Carolina, and Kenner, Louisiana is who's all checked in with us today. So Uhuru, comrades, thank you all for tuning in, for spreading this video widely and getting people, attached to this incredible dynamic study. So I'm going to read just a couple of comments that came in before I get to our first question. We had Arthur Fields in Fresno, California said, thank you for clarifying the source of the capital to support the bourgeoisie. You had Carmen Nasir in Kuwait said, the point of them being dependent is critical, as without analysis, one is conditioned to believe that the 90% of the indigenous peoples of the world are the parasites. It's we that are dependent on the 10% of the colonizers of the world. Comrade King on YouTube says, say it again, comrade, capitalism is a parasitic and literous vampire. Much respect to you for exposing it to the light. Uhuru. So this next question, or this first question, comes from Comrade Diop, and he asks, Uhuru, and comments, Uhuru, thank you for this study. You often say that imperialist or bourgeois elections are nonviolent means through which contending sectors of the ruling class compete for control of the state, and that the white capitalist ruling class is not homogeneous, but is comprised of various sectors with their own selfish interests that would take control of the state necessary in order to advance. Can you say what specific interests Trump has as opposed to other sectors he ran against? Or was the basis of other ruling class forces opposition to Trump only in the tactics or articulations of imperialist policy? In other words, how did Trump's control of the state manifest itself versus how other sectors would have used it?
Thank you, Comrade Diop, for that question. I think it's an important question. And first of all, I want to say that the thing that made Trump extraordinary, and we talk about it in this political report, and we have since he was elected and even running for office, is that you have contention between sectors of the ruling class for control of the state. And without this election process that appears to give people an opportunity to participate in determining who would govern, then you would have a situation with armed thugs just running around, with their own independent armies trying to run things, as you see in some countries around the world where it exists today. So the whole thing about having a nonviolent process through which forces that's for the same system can compete with each other without destroying the system. This is what the bourgeois elections provide. It gives them an opportunity to compete with each other because there are different contending interests, even within the capitalist system, even within the colonial capitalist system. Some rely more, for example, on energy, some on high-tech stuff. You even got a war industry, that where people build, war machinery and sell war machinery, et cetera, et cetera. So each of them has an interest in trying to project its will, their will, onto the political agenda. And that dominates, so that the policies that favors war, for example, favor in military, industry and things like that, war machinery, this whole corporate, amalgamation of stuff. And then, so you have different forces like that. And so each of them wants to have the biggest advantage, but they have forged over a period of time, they have forged this relationship among them. And the dominant relationship among them has been like this Atlanticist process where you have a sort of agreed upon context for how this struggle is going to be made. They have created actual institutions and schools at universities that produce these people who are thinking representatives, not of just of the ruling class in general, but that will promote the interests of particular sectors of the ruling class that's contending with other sectors. And so the Atlanticist bloc that includes blocs from the United States and Europe and has allowed Japan to participate for a long period of time has dominated this capitalist system for a long period of time. This is a bloc that allows for participation of a variety of capitalist interests in the same general group. So they contend from this perspective. And they don't rock the capitalist boat when they contend. They don't expose the crisis of the capitalist system itself when they contend. They might expose some difficulties or differences with each other, but not the system. Then you got Trump, who was not taken seriously when he first began his campaign for president. And he, in fact, he got a lot of free publicity because nobody took him seriously. As I say, nobody, the capitalist system, many of the liberals, many of the people who constitute the ones who lead this entire electoral process apparatus took him seriously. So he got free publicity. The stuff that he said was so outrageous. And he said outrageous stuff in part because masses of people around the country have become disgusted with the electoral process and with the system itself, and had no means by which they could express this disgust, because the white people call themselves Marxists and communists and what have you, don't play any role at all in this debate. They have their protests from time to time, except but they don't play any role. They're not connected to masses of the people, of the white people, the settlers, the colonizers. And so Trump is attacking the system, and he has to attack the system because you've got to remember in 2016 when Trump ran, he was one of 17 different Republicans representing the various interests in that sector of the ruling class contending for control of the state. And so he wins by doing what? He didn't just attack each of them, he attacked the system itself. He called it phony. He said that these guys here, they just work for the ones with the money. I know I used to pay them, this kind of stuff. And he began a process of attacking them, and that won support from a lot of white people. And that wasn't necessarily obvious because he was saying stuff that was sounding so outlandish, and it sounded outlandish because people had contained this discussion within this kind of polite, system that didn't rock the boat of the system itself. And so this is how Trump won all these white people who are disgusted, who wanted to be able to say nigger, who wanted to be able to say the Mexicans and everybody are responsible for our contradiction, who wanted to identify the foundation of the capitalist system itself as the problem, the foundation, the essential workers, if you will. So this is why you saw all the support going there. And even within the Democratic Party, what we saw is the same kind of disgust with the system that was being expressed through support for Bernie Sanders. He was the only other outlandish who was attacking in some fashion or form that seemed to be attacking the system. He was talking about billionaires. And he called himself a socialist, which is another way he dissociated himself with much of what people saw as a capitalist system contradictions. And so this is how Trump moved, and he captured the presidency. But once capturing the presidency, because he went outside the system to do that, who was going to run the state? Who was going to run the government? he had to then try to rely as much as he could on the same forces who are part of the apparatus. This whole deep state that he talked about, his forces talked about, is the state itself. Because the government is one aspect of it. But the government, essentially, it is assumed, well, it's not assumed because most people don't even know of the state of what it means, but it would be the ones who would be administering the direction of the state, etc. The state, though, is the entity. It is that force, that bureaucracy, that force that controls the army, the military, the CIA, the FBI, the whole system. That's what's required. And you got these people who are experienced. They've been in this stuff for families grow up being part of the state apparatus, FBI, CIA, et cetera, military, et cetera. They grow up in it. They've been a part of it for a long time, of that whole establishment. So Trump doesn't control it. But he tries to do stuff like putting generals and things like that in power. One of the things that Trump wanted to do, and people close to Trump, because they saw this thing with Russia, and Russia was rich in terms of petroleum, and it's a growing force out there. So some of them were tied to trying to make stuff and grow themselves and their interests through Russia. But as you saw what happened, this vicious assault came down on Trump. The generals and other forces tied to his administration got exposed. Some actually went to jail and things like that because they were not going to allow Trump to easily have access to the state. He didn't have access to state power in the same way. And that's been one of the crippling things for him all down the line. And so, the General Kelly and all the other people he put in place, et cetera, even heads of the intelligence organization, they worked against Trump throughout this process. And that's part of the rocky road that he's experienced throughout. When I say the intelligence apparatus and the military, et cetera, you got to remember that they were connected to stuff like the media entities and all these other forces. They worked collaborative to bring down the Trump regime. And so he did begin to foster and pull together some interest, but it never got consolidated in the best possible way. This is one of the reasons why even now, the attack keeps coming against Russia, as it does with China, which was already the case. But Russia became a serious factor for a sector of the bourgeoisie that did not want to see this thing that Trump was doing. It wasn't because they love Russia so much. It was because their interests relied on Russia being maintained and contained. Their interest in Europe and their interest in parts of the world relied on a weak, crippled Russia that they had begun to dismember with the Soviet Union itself. I know it was a long response, Comrade Diop. I hope it was understandable. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, thank you. And thank you to Comrade Diop for posing the question. And thank you, Chairman, for your answer. We have another question that came in from Comrade King on YouTube, and he asks, he comments and asks, I unite with the party's position that claims to this land by Africans is illegitimate. However, does the party have plans to unite in or petition for quote unquote legitimacy from indigenous people that would give Africans that prefer to remain on this land the right to do so?
Uhuru, yeah, our petition is to stand shoulder to shoulder with the indigenous people and to fight to take their land, et cetera, recognizing that it is their land. And that we can be partners in this. We recognize as the African People's Socialist Party that Africa is our national homeland on the one hand, and that we have to fight for Africa, but we're also a part of the revolution of the Americas, what's characterized as the Americas. We're dispersed all over the Americas, and some places the African population or the indigenous population has been decimated or nearly decimated and things like that. But yeah, this is indigenous land. And the way we think that this issue is resolved is not through some kind of petition that we're going to defeat capitalism. We're going to do it together. We're going to defeat colonialism. The border wall that Trump is talking about is going to be made insignificant anyway. I mean, and we talk about the wall that Trump talks about, but there's already this fence that they've got stretched out across the border separating the indigenous people from each other and from their lands. And all of that's coming down because we're going to be united. There's going to be a revolution that happens, and it's going to be it's not going to be contained inside any borders. That those walls are coming down as a consequence of the unity between the indigenous and the African people in making this revolution. And that's how we determine what our relationship is going to be. It's not going to be simply having some kind of treaty that's been created. We treat through practice. And practice is what's going to bring it down and bring our unity to what it needs to be. And we do that, first of all, by conceding this is the land of the indigenous people, Uhuru.
Uhuru. All right, so that was Comrade King on...
That's the only principle where, you see, it's important for us because this strategy has been used by land thieves globally. This is one of the reasons in so-called American jurisprudence, you hear the stuff that possession is 99% of ownership. Why in the hell would you have to have some kind of law or presumed law that says possession, the one who got it, means 99% of ownership? You say that because you know that theft is the basis of what has been accumulated for the most part, whether it's theft of labor, theft of land, theft of, of resources, etc. So if I got it, I own it. And that's what happened. And so they go to Africa, they attack Africa, they take part of Africa, they call themselves South Africans, they rename themselves, they rename the land, they steal the land and what have you. They did the same thing in what they call Rhodesia, named it for a cracker named Cecil Rhodes, who killed more Africans in the process of extending the British empire and taking our land, our resources, our happiness, and then drawing the border separating us from other Africans, etc. They did that in occupied Palestine, where white people left Europe and some even left America and went and attacked and murdered the Palestinian Arab people, stole their land, said that God gave it to them 2,000 years ago, like they got a God that's a real estate agent. And I believe that God is probably a real estate agent or something like that. And this is how that's worked. And so you end up working just like them. When you say, when the indigenous people in the Americas, a fundamental contradiction that they have to deal with is the theft of their land and their resources. Then you join and say, this is my land. It ain't the white man's land, it's my land. You just added another burden, another assault on the indigenous people here. And that's not to say Africans were not here, didn't get here a long time ago. That's not even the question, because Africans did not lose our freedom, our resources, as a consequence of white people coming to these territories known as America. Africans lost our freedom and our resources as a consequence of white people going to Africa, stealing our resources and bringing us to another land where they worked us like beasts and what have you. We have an interest in common with the indigenous peoples of the Americas, and we unite with them wholeheartedly, just like we unite with the Palestinian Arabs and to take back their resources. We cannot end up, whatever our intentions of uniting with imperialism, this whole colonial setup that's based on stealing people's land and resources. So I just wanted to say that, Uhuru, I think it's important. That was King.
Uhuru, yes, Chairman, that was.
King L, you know?
It doesn't give a last name,
all right, Uhuru.
Yeah, Uhuru. All right, so Chairman, that was the last question and like recent comments. So I don't know if there was any particular points that you wanted to expound on. I know like towards the end, you kind of were reading a little bit faster to try to conclude that section, but I mean, you really went in and, really clearly defined what fascism is, but like I said, we don't have any other questions. So I can
read some more, but I want to say that, a difference in what is happening with us now is that our objective in going through this political report is not just trying to become some kind of social media stars and getting X numbers of likes and views and et cetera. We're forging a revolutionary process, and the African People's Socialist Party was an organization that we came into existence in 1972. But our immediate history deals with coming back from SNCC, the civil rights process up to now. So we've been a part of a continuum. and the success of the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 1960s, because they murdered us all around the country, jailed us. I was in and out of prison all the time. And they slandered us and continue to do so even today, with the help sometimes of African people who are supposed to be revolutionaries or supposed to be militants or et cetera. So we've gone through that process. And while many Africans were killed, obviously that took them out of the capacity to be involved in development. Death, you don't develop beyond death. And many people were locked up. And that took them, in many instances, most instances, out of the political process, especially since the defeat of the Black Revolution. People sometimes are upset when we say that because it wasn't defeated, but it was defeated. It was a revolutionary movement that was defeated. It doesn't mean that revolution conceptually was defeated, but the revolution was defeated. And assassinations, mass arrests all around this country, it was something that didn't happen to anybody else. If you read something about what they call COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program that was initiated by the FBI, you'll see that the FBI that did this, they did it against the Communist Party, they did it against other left organizations, but they did nothing like what they did to the colonized. Like this war without terms. There were no terms. They killed us all around this country, killed us in broad daylight. They attacked our offices with shootouts. They framed people and put them in prison. And they created special laws just for us. The SWAT team was born through this process, this designer laws, designer sentencing and things like that to deal with the colonized. So the defeat of the revolution was almost complete. I mean, you had all these people who went to prison. They're political prisoners that we're talking about now, old men who rotting in prison cells and have been for a long period of time. And some people have become so demoralized and dispirited by this. They say something must be wrong with Black people because we let our people stay in prison all this time. No. What happened was the assault on the Black Revolution was so complete that they almost put the revolution in prison. That's why you had uprisings and of significance in places, all in California and Attica. And in Rayford, Florida, these prison uprisings because they put the revolutionaries were in prison, but they killed off and destroyed our organizations and demoralized the people. And there were very few of us left outside the prison that could continue this struggle and help people to recognize and fight for the political prisoners. So what happened was white left, the so-called left, the white left colonizers became the representatives and the spokespersons for the Black Revolution of the 1960s. So now the people who are supposedly helping to free the Black political prisoners are no longer part of the Black Revolution, but the settlers who want to use freeing those prisoners as a means by which they would build themselves, as opposed to completing the revolution that the brothers and sisters went to prison for trying to make in the first place. But the African People's Socialist Party, we stay on the ground. And I'm not talking about the complexities of surrounding that, because there were complexities involved in it and how we had to deal with the political police and all these aggressions that were made against us. That's not worth talking about now for a number of reasons. Part of it is because we don't want them to know every damn thing that we did to survive. But one of the things that we did to complete this revolution is we opened up a front. A new front. This was something that had never been thought of, conceived of before in the white community among the settlers themselves, that was called the African People's Solidarity Committee. So even as they were assaulting us, we initiated an assault, a counteroffensive of sorts inside the colonizer community with the creation of the African People's Solidarity Committee. And they had particular kinds of responsibilities under the leadership, under our leadership. This is not some quote unquote allies, white comrades. These were forces who worked under the leadership of the African Revolution, the African People's Socialist Party. It projected the struggle to defeat colonial capitalism into the colonizer communities, bedrooms, neighborhoods, households themselves. And that was the creation of the African Solidarity Committee, Uhuru Solidarity Movement, etc. The revolution continues to grow. And so it grew in that capacity. It grew in the different kinds of entities that we've created so that the revolution could continue through the African National Women's Organization, through the All African Peoples Development Empowerment Project, through the APEDF and the various other entities and institutions that we created. We kept growing the revolutionary project in 1,000 different ways. And some of them, when people saw us, they didn't know what they were looking at. They didn't know necessarily they were dealing with an actual comprehensive strategical drive of the African Revolution. So when people say the APSC, they see oh, them white people, who are the white people? Those white people are expressions of the African Revolution under the leadership of its advanced detachment, the African People's Socialist Party. So we stayed on the ground. And as a consequence of staying on the ground, we developed. We didn't develop just as an organization dealing with this question or that question. We developed as a part of a continuum to complete this revolution that we had begun. And we didn't retreat from that. We continued to grow and develop. And of course, how we grew and how we developed were determined in part by the contradiction that we had to contend with. And contending with these contradictions meant that we learned 1,000 different kinds of lessons that helped to grow our worldview, that helped to develop our philosophy. And African internationalism is a philosophy. It is a distinct school of thought. It is a distinct school of revolutionary philosophy. And so you hear people use the same words, and you're going to hear more and more of that. Increasingly, you hear people talking about colonialism, who were anti-racist up until yesterday. And we are saying that's not good enough. We've on the battlefields is where we are forging our philosophies through practice, that we forge our understanding, and not just in the United States, but around the world. We reconnected the African Revolution. African internationalism did that. The African People's Socialist Party. This is no Pan-Africanist claptrap. This is a revolutionary movement that recognizes that African people are one nation, having been forcibly dispersed around the world. And a part of the struggle for our liberation is to reconnect that nation, give us the power of the totality of the African population and the African resources, both human and material resources that at least white power understands necessary for its existence. And many Africans who call themselves revolutionaries and Marxists and black leftists, a term I really hate, call themselves all of these terms, don't understand just how powerful and significant our resources when in our command are. And so in many ways, the white people are better Pan-Africanists than the so-called Pan-Africanists or the so-called leftists, because they recognize the significance of controlling Africa and all of Africa, and in fact, the whole world. We, in order to liberate the world, start liberating ourselves with a clear view that the whole parasitic colonial capitalist system rests upon our captivity, living under colonial domination. And so this is who we are. And so we represent a specific school of thought, revolutionary thought. And because it is true that revolution is the only way out of this. There's not going to be any sweet talking or embracing our way out of this. Revolution. And in order to make revolution doesn't look the same today as it did then, because so much has transpired since we started talking about this in terms of the colonized people ourselves. We say that the whole colonial capitalist system rests upon the foundation of colonialism, what people are calling racial capitalism, what people like to refer to as institutional racism and stuff like that. The whole capitalist system rests upon colonialism. It is colonial capitalism. And so the African People's Socialist Party has been out in front around these questions, solving the problems of the revolution, not trying to solve the problem of how many likes or views we get on Facebook or how many students we can get to join this or that kind of thing, but building a revolutionary project and process that brings all of Africa together so that African people can reclaim our dignity as a people. We can reclaim our Africa and all the resources that makes it possible for African people to live dignified lives, having complete control of our resources so they benefit us, so that we don't have to worry about cancers and disease and poverty and mosquitoes killing us and things like this. You know, we control our own resources, build the institutions necessary for our freedom, and we can reconstitute a decent humane kind of society, not some vicious society that comes from Europe, based on Europe's history and not on our history, based on a kind of social system that responds to the poverty and despair. And in this despair of the human spirit that exists inside Europe is so different from what we have had the benefit of, what grew us as a part of the human species. We have to recapture that. And in doing so, we really participate in liberating the whole world, not just Africa, not just African people, the whole world. We don't have some little narrow worldview that somehow thinks that you can solve every problem by dealing with stuff like police, body cameras, and what a tiny worldview. I just saw something today. I'm looking at how this struggle against racism that they're talking about is making such headway since George Floyd, because now we're looking at how corporations are going to have, more Black people on their boards, more Africans on the board of corporations. That's going to really help George Floyd. That's going to help people like George Floyd, who died in the streets of this country, who was freezing to death right now in Texas and other places, and in Missouri, St. Louis right now. They're going to be helped because of some kind of Black person becoming a head of a corporation that's part of the entity that spreads the misery of African people and other oppressed peoples around the world. The African People's Socialist Party is the solution. And our program, our philosophy, that's the solution. And people who are genuinely interested in getting out of this will support, join the African People's Socialist Party and Hutu movement. It's just that simple. And that's one of the reasons we go through the studies, and to help remind ourselves as members of the African People's Socialist Party, of the Hutu movement, our friends and supporters of who we are, because we are the party of the African working class. We are the party of the African nation. Even people who don't necessarily call themselves members or cannot be members for any number of reasons, this is your party. You know it, those of us. And sometimes people are too afraid to come on board, but that's a different story altogether. So it is now something like 9:41. And I think I stopped on page 28. I will read just a little more. So I think I'm at the subtitle. The crisis is the crisis is not cyclical; it is permanent. At one time, Marxism was a profoundly significant ideological and political force. And so many oppressed peoples around the world were attracted to Marx because it seemed to suggest the ability of the peoples to be free as a concept of through overturning the capitalist system. And then what happened, a number of things happened, but a major, a really important kind of thing happened was the failure of Marxism as it was expressed through the Soviet Union, the state of the Soviet Union, and in other places where people won of freedom, liberation, actually, resulted in a lot of dismay, and it helped the imperialists, the colonial capitalists, to regain political and ideological authority in the whole world. And so what we saw was that the whole Islamic movement grew in greater significance globally. And Islam, for some, became the only sort of ideological entity, the ideological expression of poor people around the world. And so in some instances, the Marxist movements in parts of the Middle East, North Africa, and the United States lost its significance and influence with the collapse of the Soviet Union. And that had, major consequences of sorts. And so it lost its influence, and it allowed the emergence also of other expressions of poor people, and one was Islam. And you got to remember that the Islamic movement was something that was really sparked and grown because of the poverty of the imposed poverty of people where Islam was most concentrated, certainly in the Middle East and North Africa and places like that, and other places around the world as well. And it became and because Islam itself has its own history of struggling with the advent of European power. The whole Crusades was a looting expedition, this religious expression of looting called the Crusades, with the cross and blessings of the Pope, except marching across what we now refer to as the Middle East, looting and raping and stealing and things like that. It became a part of the whole legacy of Islam and Islamic resistance to what was not called white power as such, but they were against these infidels who were essentially doing this stuff, this looting, on the religious banner, Christian banner. And so what has developed with the collapse of the Soviet Union in terms of a single significant ideological expression of opposition was Islam. And but we are not religious. We're not Islamicists as such. We are African internationalists. And as African internationalists, we have a scientific expression, understanding, and we have to arm African people globally with the philosophy of African internationalism. So just as someone in France or in Belgium or in Germany will strike out, or in the United States will strike out against some expression of aggression, attack on Muslims and Islam throughout the world, African internationalism, the philosophy of African internationalism has to inform African people globally in the same fashion. That we must have the ability to recognize the commonality, the source of our oppression as a people everywhere, and how that is central to the existing social system that oppresses Muslims, that oppresses people of various ideological beliefs around the world. And African internationalism does that. And that's why we go through this. That's why it's so important, brothers and sisters of the party and the people of the Uhuru movement, to really grasp this and grapple with it. And it has to be rooted among the masses of our people. We don't go to the temple or to the mosque or to the church as such to do this, but we should be having our own institutionalized presence in these communities where we live, where African people are oppressed. And people need to be able to come together collectively to discuss our oppression and to say how we're going to deal with it, to have ceremonies around. That's why African Martyrs Day is so important. People know that there was a film just released about the so-called Judas and the Black Messiah. And they would have us concentrate our understanding of everything around the murder of Fred Hampton. When Fred was killed, 4 days later, after the murder of Fred Hampton on December 4th, December 8th, 1969, they attacked the Panther office in Los Angeles. Had a 4-hour shootout there with those courageous 4 people, held them off more than 300 military forces for 4 hours right there. They were killing us all over. They killed Malcolm, they killed King, they killed Lumumba, they overthrew Lumumba. They were making an aggression against the African Revolution globally, all around the world. They had to murder us to put us out of commission. And they didn't just do that. That was one aspect of it. The other aspect of it was they had to raise up ideological substitutions for the revolution. They will now turn us into anti-racists, making white people and white America like us. They would turn us into people who think that our problem is because somebody doesn't like us, as opposed to the social system that was born of our oppression and that needs our oppression in order to maintain itself. If you want to destroy colonial capitalism, then you unite with and support the African Revolution. This is what's going to bring it down, not just for Africa, but for the peoples of the world. Everybody on earth has a stake in supporting the African People's Socialist Party, the advanced attachment of the African Revolution, Africa for Africans at home and abroad. And this is what it is that we must understand. And the party has been working to reconnect the African Revolution in a way that has never been connected before. So that's what our mission is. That's why we have this discussion today. That's why we're talking about a political report to the second plenary of the 7th Congress. We are the only revolutionary African organization that I know of, that I say African, that's the only one that is fighting to reignite, reunify the African Revolution. I'm not talking about some supposed revolution that's happening in South Africa or Haiti or some other limited expression of our need to be free from colonialism. I'm talking about a philosophy in the first place that recognizes one struggle being fought on many different fronts, that recognizes it by creating the African People's Socialist Party that's expressed through an African Socialist International, so that Africans all around the globe can be a part of this struggle. And we're fighting the same struggle everywhere. We should be in the townships and the most oppressed communities that we exist in as revolutionaries, taking the gospel of African internationalism and taking the practice of African internationalism to be able to control our lives and to destroy imperialist white power and any power that would impose itself on Africa and our resources. Comrade Director Akile, I think I've probably led us to the place where we need to be right now. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. Yes, thank you so much. And I just, again, really appreciate this study, this political report. And I will say that, well, King is King L. He confirmed that he's a King L on YouTube. And also Comrade Nasir in Kuwait said, please convey to the chairman appreciation and let him know that the lack of questions is a testament to the clarity of his analysis and writing. So, Uhuru. So thank you again, Chairman, so much for this profound study. And we just look forward to continuing to study this political report. So yeah, we will get into announcements because we have lots of announcements to get to. So, all right. So this study was brought to you by the Department of Agitation and Propaganda, Winning the War of Ideas. For your worldwide revolutionary news and analysis, you can visit theburningspear.com. For revolutionary radio, dynamic shows, and music by Africans all around the world, tune into Black Power 96.3 FM, broadcasting out of St. Petersburg, Florida, and accessible via the Black Power 96 app for Apple and Android, or online at blackpower96.org. The theory of African internationalism is a theory of practice. So I did see some comments about how can people get involved. Well, all of our energy is spent, focused on the destruction of colonial capitalism. The chairman talked about that in great deal today. And so if you want to get involved, if you want to join Africans of the world, go to our website, apspuhuru.org, and fill out that contact form. No matter where you're located, fill out that contact form to, get started with the process of, joining the African Revolution. Order your copy of Chairman Omali Yeshitela's latest book, Vanguard, The Advanced Attachment of the African Revolution, the political report to the 7th Party Congress. You can order that book and other works by the chairman at burningspearmarketplace.com. Sisters, brothers, and allies of African freedom and independence, you are invited to the African People's Socialist Party's African Martyrs Day 2021. This commemoration was designated by the party to recognize the assassination of Malcolm X as a symbol of Africans everywhere who were murdered by our enemies to stop our onward march toward the total liberation of Africa and African people. African Martyrs Day is a day of celebrating the undying spirit of the African Revolution, fighting for freedom of the African nation. Join us today at 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central, and 12 p.m. Pacific time, today, February 21st, as we pay tribute to our martyrs of the African People's Socialist Party. Their revolutionary spirit lives on. To register, You can visit tinyurl.com/African Martyrs Day. Again, that's tinyurl.com/African Martyrs Day. That's happening today. So right after this or during this, go ahead and get registered to attend. Again, it's 3 Eastern, 2 p.m. Central, 12 p.m. Pacific. 2 years ago, the African People's Socialist Party's Southern Region declared March 1st to be Mafundi Lake Day. We will celebrate and learn more about our courageous warrior who stood tall and fought for our freedom. On Monday, March 1st at 6 p.m. Central Time, join us, his family, activists, friends, and comrades to raise up our fists and salute the life of one of the greatest sons of Africa. Long live Mafundi Lake. To register for this event, you can visit tinyurl.com/Mafundi Lake. That's MAFUNDI Lake. tinyurl.com/Mafundi Lake to celebrate the life and legacy of Comrade Mafundi Lake. We are calling on people to follow the All African Peoples Development and Empowerment Project on Facebook or visit developmentforafrica.org for important information and helpful tips in regards to the colonial virus COVID-19. APDEP has recently launched an international telehealth program, a free resource to African people to get our COVID-19 related questions and concerns answered by licensed doctors and nurses through Project Black Ankh. You can make your free virtual appointment with one of their professional health providers by going to developmentforafrica.org/telehealth. Chairman, I wanted to veer from the announcements a little just because I know that there's an event with Black is Back coming up March 6th. Can you speak on that just a little bit? Are you able to?
Yes, the March 6th event, the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparation stems in part from our party's continuously attack on this whole notion of that fascism is a problem. That's what much of the white left and much of their followers are saying, that we have to be fighting against fascism. And then there's this whole concept of neoliberalism, that's the real problem. And so we have pushed to have this discussion, and so that people who have followed us and for a while understand more and more what the question revolves around, but we think is a really important discussion. So on March 6th, we're going to have this, and it's going to be comprised of different people who are members of the Black is Back Coalition, but it will also include forces from Unión de Barrio, the Mexican National Liberation Movement, with which we've had a relationship for more than 35 years, Comrade Penny Hess from the African People's Solidarity Committee, and others. So it's going to be really, Comrade Louisa Kinshasa, who a Congolese born African in exile in Europe for a long period of time now, living in England, and who is the Secretary General of the African Socialist International. So it's going to be a really important discussion. And part of this is about just destroying the ability of the white left to define our reality for us and what it is that we should be fighting for. So I think this is one example, I think, of the success of the party in consolidating an ideological trajectory for the anti-colonial movement of our revolution. Uhuda.
Thank you, Chairman. And to learn more about that event, I believe you can go to blackisbackcoalition.org. You can register at blackisbackcoalition.org to prepare to attend. Again, that's March 6th. So thank you, Chairman. So if you're looking for more opportunities for live political education with Chairman Omali Yeshitela, tune in every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern on the Chairman Omali Yeshitela's Facebook like page and the Burning Spear TV on YouTube. With the chairman's address to the African nation, discussing important topical issues and providing us with an African internationalist analysis. The chairman previously did his address to the African nation on the movie Judas and the Black Messiah. So if you have not checked that out yet, you can find it on the chairman's Facebook page, as well as the Burning Spear TV YouTube page. And yeah, again, 3 p.m. Eastern to tune into those weekly. And lastly, to keep up with our movement events, because there are plenty, a couple more happening today and in the coming days, you can visit theburningspear.com's events page and subscribe to our mailing list. So you get all of the HTML updates about, what the party and the Uhuru movement is doing, what events are coming up. And yeah, you can see the event listings. If you have an event coming up, you can also submit that to the Burning Spear calendar to be reviewed for approval. So utilize the burningspear.com events page to fill up your calendar for the year. So I just want to thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study. Uhuru.